Okay, good morning, everybody in the UK. Good afternoon, evening, everyone in China, and good day, everyone in between. Welcome to our session this morning, our webinar session on intellectual property in China in 2018. Delighted to have Tom Duke, Senior IP Officer from the British Embassy in Beijing, and my colleague Mick Ryan, the Head of Business Environment and IP at CBBC. Well, IP is one of those issues that, well, never seems to really ever be completely solved in China. And while lots of progress is made and lots of things are changing and evolving and improving for international companies doing business in China, it's certainly something that is very much top of our agenda when we're advising companies on their first steps and indeed their expansion in China. Okay, so just before we get going, I want to give a little bit of a background of who we are. If you don't know who the China Britain Business Council is, please do visit our website, www.cbc.org. Our role is to help UK companies to engage with China. That could be China in China, that could be Chinese companies here in the UK, or that could be engaging with Chinese companies in third markets all around the world. We offer lots of advice, research. Ultimately, we're a membership organisation, but our fundamental role is to help UK companies to engage better in the China market. So please do get in touch if you have any questions, or if China is an increasingly important market for you and your business and you want to take advantage of the opportunities that are there. All right, brilliant. So just before we get going again, a little bit of background on our speakers. So Tom Duke has been the UK's intellectual property attaché to China since December 2011. He's based in the British Embassy in Beijing. Tom is part of the UK Intellectual Property Office's International IP Attaché Network, which includes attaché postings to India, Brazil, and Southeast Asia. Prior to joining the embassy, Tom was director responsible for the IP Centre at the EU Chamber of Commerce in Seoul in South Korea. In Korea, Tom designed and implemented government engagement programs on IP on behalf of European companies and launched projects to enhance regional cooperation on IP enforcement. Mick Ryan's recent focus is online intellectual property rights and cross-border anti-counterfeiting. Working together with the British Embassy, he is CBBC's leads on a cooperation programme between British industry and e-commerce platforms owned by Alibaba Group and JD, as well as social media app WeChat. By facilitating dialogue, CBBC aims to support the development of IP protection mechanisms on the internet in China and the ability of rights owners to use them. Mick is also chief editor of CBBC's annual publication, The China Business Handbook, which provides practical tips on a range of the most common issues that foreign companies face when doing business in China. Before joining CBBC, Mick was a project manager at a consultancy provided Chinese sources strategies to US automakers, where he was the account manager and China representative for luxury electric car company Fisker Automotive. So that's just a little bit of background on our speakers today. Just before we get going, if you do want to ask any questions as we go along, that's absolutely fine. Just type your question into the area that I'm highlighting. If your question is pertinent to what is going on in the dialogue at the time, I'll stop the speakers and introduce your question. Otherwise, we'll save it to the end. And if we don't get to it at all, I'll happily pass it on to the two speakers who will be willing to follow up afterwards. Just as we get going, if I could ask, please, for people to click on the raise your hand button. Just click on the raise your hand button. That will just make me feel less lonely, I guess. Just give me the confidence that you can all actually hear me. Fantastic. I can see lots of hands are raising. Brilliant. That's fantastic. I'll put all your hands down again, and I shall jump across to China, and hopefully our colleagues will still be there. Mick and Tom, are you there?
Yes. Hello, David. Hello, everybody.
Hi there.
Brilliant. Well, I'll hand over to you, Tom. You're up first.
Okay, great. So hello, everyone. Great to be meeting with you and speaking to you this morning. So my name is Tom Duke. I'm the intellectual property attaché to China based in the British Embassy, Beijing. Next slide, please, David. So I'm going to spend about 15 minutes at the start of the session this morning giving a high-level overview of the Chinese IP environment and then talking about some practical steps that businesses can take as they are either entering China or exploring new ventures with Chinese partners to mitigate IP risk here, and then touch on two topics which are particularly relevant for British businesses and especially right now. And one of those is the technology import-export regulations, TIER or TIER, and then trademarks. And I'll speak a little bit more about those when we get to that point. Next slide, please, David. So IP in China is something which has been in the news quite a lot over the past 6 months or so. And there seem to be two types of news articles out there. So one is saying that the IP environment in China is incredibly challenging, too challenging, in fact, and something needs to be done to level the playing field and tackle discriminatory policies and actions by China targeted at foreign entities. And the other strand of reporting seems to be saying, well, even if that was true maybe several years ago, things are different now. There's been lots of progress. China now has a lot of its own intellectual property to protect, and the system is different. Now, China is a huge place, as any of you who've done business here or visited will know. There's lots of variation around the country, and both of those things and all points in between are possibly true at the same time. So to take the point about the size of the Chinese IP system and the development over the past 5, 10, 20 years, well, China's IP system now is larger than any other country or even region in the world. So I've got some statistics here on patent and trademark applications in 2017, so last calendar year in China. So 1.4 million patent applications and 5.7 million trademark applications. They are an order of magnitude larger than anywhere else in the world. So the year before, 2016, for which we have comparative data across a number of different countries, China had 1.1 million patent applications, and that was more than all of the patent applications in the United States, the European Patent Office, Japan and Korea combined together. So it is a significant size of applications coming in to China. And trademark applications, similarly, the equivalent number in the United Kingdom is likely to have been somewhere around 120,000. So 5.7 million versus 120,000 applications. It is not just one, but several orders of magnitude larger. Another important point of the wider context to remember is that nowadays the Chinese IP system is primarily used and being designed for Chinese companies. Previously, when China joined the WTO, maybe back in 2001, the Chinese IP system was developing alongside China's international commitments. So it was adopting laws, it was adopting regulations and practices from overseas because that was what China had to do in order to join these international trading arrangements. Those days have changed. The changes that are currently being brought through the Chinese legislation system are based upon the needs of Chinese companies and other actors within the Chinese system, not necessarily only adopting foreign practices and foreign legislation. This shows up in the statistics. So of the 1.4 million patent applications, we're now looking at over 85% of those were by domestic Chinese applicants, and upwards of 95% of the trademark applications in China were made by domestic Chinese residents. We don't yet have a number for the number of civil court cases that, on IP that went through the Chinese courts last year. It's likely to be somewhere in the ballpark of 150,000 when those numbers come out in the next few months. But a number that's been quite stable over the past couple of years is only about 1% of those 100,000 plus cases that are being heard by the Chinese courts involve foreign parties. So the story very much now is the Chinese IP system is being used by Chinese companies to protect their rights to their inventions, to their brands and their creativity. And the litigation that is happening is that almost all Chinese companies suing other Chinese companies. And this has some quite important implications from my work in the embassy on the policy level, and indeed for British companies who are doing business in China. Next slide, please, David. So we talk a bit now about the risks that businesses face, IP risks that British businesses face as they come to China. Now, our view in the embassy is a cautious but optimistic one. So we say that the IP risks here in China are genuine, and we encourage businesses to identify and think about how to mitigate these risks as early as possible as they are looking to do business in China. However, we believe that in most cases, it is possible for businesses to take steps using the Chinese legal system and administrative systems to lower that risk, to mitigate it to levels that are acceptable for businesses to pursue the opportunities on offer here. So yes, these risks are genuine, and in many places they are different to risks in other markets that you may be more familiar with. But there are steps that can be taken if you specifically identify and think about these at the outset and the early part of your business. And there are lots of different business opportunities in China. You could be exporting, or you could be licensing technology or creative content into the Chinese market. You could be investing in China because you've grown your market here and it's time to have a physical presence in the Chinese mainland, whether it's manufacturing or distribution, retail, or what have you. You may be looking to attract inward investment from Chinese partners, or in China itself, you might be looking to bring Chinese partners into your supply chain, maybe as contract manufacturers, OEMs, or other parts of your business. Or increasingly, we're seeing British companies, universities looking to set up research and development partnerships with entities in China, and creating new IP, of course, brings some quite important IP implications to that. So there's a range of different opportunities here. The opportunities are vast and exciting, but it's important to think about the types of risks that you might need to mitigate in order to make those ventures successful. On the slide here, I've listed a bit of a checklist that we share with British companies, just the things to run down at the outset to try and see if you're setting up your venture to have the best chance possible of mitigating that risk and being successful. So I'll quickly run through the points on the slide, and we can pick up any questions in the Q&A if people want to hear more. So first of all, apply for and enforce your IP rights in China. IP rights are territorial, so your British trademark or your British patent, or indeed European or US equivalents, will not have any legal weight here in the Chinese mainland. So apply for your IP rights in China, and do this as early as possible in the process. What you should be doing now is, when you file a trademark in the UK, your first trademark, your trademark attorney should then be talking to you very early on about which other countries in the world you want to extend that protection to, and China should always be in the top tier of countries that you are looking at. Even if perhaps you don't have business in China in the very near future, it may be that your competitors are based here, or your potential infringers of your IP rights may be based here. China now is at a level where it's too large and too important to ignore in your IP right filing strategy. So get your Chinese IP right portfolio in place. As you set up an arrangement in China with Chinese partners, whether it's joint venture partners, contract manufacturers, or distributors, or whoever, make sure you get good legal advice from experienced China lawyers about how you set up your contracts. China is a country that, surprisingly for many people, ranks very highly in the World Bank Index of Enforceability of Contracts. So if you do this properly, then you can be sure to have a contract which is both enforceable against your Chinese partner, and that really sets the incentives for your partner as your relationship will unfold over a period of time. Our key recommendation for British companies as they set up these contracts is to ask your experienced China lawyer who's helping you on this. Ask them, how is my contract enforceable against my Chinese partner, or the counterparty to this contract, if there is a problem in the future? That is a key question, because we do unfortunately sometimes see companies that set up contracts licensing IP that, for example, have jurisdiction, English law, English courts, or somewhere else, and those contracts are effectively unenforceable against Chinese counterparties. So make sure you ask your lawyer, how are these enforceable against Chinese companies? Hopefully you'll never need to enforce them, but having an enforceable contract helps to set the parameters and incentives for the relationship over the course of your deal. Speaking of relationships, it's a bit of a cliche, but they are very important in China. So do due diligence on your Chinese partners, the Chinese customers. Make sure that you've built some interpersonal trust there. But one way to make sure that partnerships and relationships survive over the longer term is to think about what value it is that you are adding to the relationship and to your Chinese partner. So China has had a very successful development model over the past few decades, where when one entity has a good idea, a new product, potentially protected by intellectual property or sometimes not, then you immediately see a number of other companies piling behind to do the same thing. And then this has sucked in huge volumes of people from the interior of China and from the countryside to work in factories, another sites related to the manufacturing investment sectors. This has been the investment model, development model in China for a long time. However, it makes it very challenging to protect intellectual property. As soon as someone has a new idea, hundreds, thousands of others piling behind very, very quickly and look to undercut that, perhaps by infringing or indeed by using lower quality materials or other types of ways to undercut the competitiveness. So think about how you can work with your Chinese partners to keep adding value, to keep innovating, adding something new, which is going to keep them half a step ahead of the competition and this mass of other companies that are going to pile in behind. Because if you're not doing that, then there are some incentives on that partner to cut and run early, potentially to violate the intellectual property terms in your agreements. And that then means that your venture may not see it all the way through to the end. So these are some top tips. Apply for IP rights, get your contracts right, and really think about how your relationships are going to be structured over the course of the deal. Next slide, please, David. In the interest of time, I'll keep moving through relatively rapidly, but I think it's important that we touch on two particular topics which are going to be fairly important over the coming year. So the first one is TIR, Technology Import-Export Regulations. So if you haven't heard of TIR, then it's quite likely that over the next year or so you will hear more about this. It is a part of the Chinese regulatory environment that is often linked to the concept of forced technology transfer, which is something that the US and others are currently looking at as regards to Chinese policies and Chinese IP practice. And TIR is an important thing to consider if you are licensing intellectual property into China, particularly if that's technology, or it may also be software or indeed creative content. So the key thing to think about as you're doing this is there are three parts of TIR which are on the slide there, which sometimes can present challenges to international entities who are doing business in China, licensing IP into the Chinese market. So first of all, if you make any improvements to that technology after it has been licensed, it should be owned by the entity that made those improvements, which is typically the entity in China. Second, if you're an overseas licensor, you should then be made to assume full third-party infringement liability. So when your Chinese partner uses the technology you're licensing to them, if they're accused of IP infringement, then you need to take on liability for that infringement. And thirdly, in a lot of projects now, we're seeing some R&D collaborations where UK and Chinese entities are pooling their technological expertise and developing new IP, new technology. But unfortunately, some of the provisions of TIR make applying Chinese IP and Chinese technology into those collaboration projects somewhat cumbersome. So these are three barriers which need to be overcome if you're looking to license IP into China and get around this problem of forced technology transfer. So you're bringing your tech into the Chinese market, but you lose control over it and it's absorbed into the Chinese supply chain. There are things that can be done, and again, experienced China lawyers should be able to talk you through what some of these options are. The key thing to remember is it's that crossing of the border, the licensing the technology into China and the payment coming back to you in the UK that is the crucial thing to watch. That is where these provisions apply. If you could license, say, to yourself, your subsidiary in China, or to a joint venture company that you either majority or equally control in China, then the risk is significantly lower if you then subsequently conclude a domestic Chinese technology license rather than one which crosses a border. You may also, for example, be able to license to a Chinese partner outside of the Chinese mainland, so that again, you're not licensing across and into the Chinese border. These are two ways that TIR can be mitigated. There are others, and experienced Chinese lawyers should be able to help you to do this and make sure that you can keep control of your technologies you license it into China, but also of new iterative improvements, whether that's for localization or any other improvements that are made on top of the technology that you're licensing in. So watch out for TIR over the next few months, because this is something which we think will be in the news as the year unfolds. Next slide, please, David. A topic which is actually sort of feels slightly further away from that, but I think we always need to mention as we are doing presentations on intellectual property in China is trademarks. So the single most common business irritant that we have reported to us in the embassy, in the IP team here in the embassy, is bad faith trademark applications. So what I mean by this is Chinese companies or individuals make unauthorized and preemptive applications for your brands, for the brands that you have developed in the UK or internationally. This is also called trademark squatting sometimes, or brand squatting, and it can be incredibly frustrating for companies as they look to enter the Chinese market. You may need to spend months or even years going through administrative and legal processes to try and win back the marks. It's never certain that you will be able to do that, and it may mean that you have to either, unfortunately, make a payment to the squatter to get your mark transferred back, and this can be upwards of £60,000 in order to get marks back, or rebrand, or look at how you can you can use different names or different logos in the Chinese market. It's a really difficult problem. It is possible to use the legal administrative system. Things are improving a bit on that front, and we have more details on the specific grounds and arguments that can be used in our fact sheet on our website, which I've included a screenshot of there on the slides. And we work with a number of companies to help them design strategies to try and secure their brand and not have damaging delays to market entry in China. But the single top tip, if you haven't done so already, you should apply to register your trademarks in China now, as early as possible, because if your company has a reputation in your industry, even if it's not necessarily in China yet, if you have a reputation in the UK, in Europe, or in your international industry sector, it's likely that there are Chinese participants in the industry that are aware of your brand, and there is already a risk there. So get there first, apply for your trademark. It will cost you, hundreds or possibly low thousands of pounds, depending on how many marks you're going to apply for and in how many classes. But that is an incredibly good investment, because if you don't do that, as I say, it's upwards of £60,000 a couple of years down the line when you come to try and enter the Chinese market and get your mark back from a bad faith Chinese actor. So next slide, please, David. So they're the points that I wanted to quickly run through at the outset to this seminar. I'm going to hand over to Mick Ryan now, but before I do that, I just wanted to say we work in the embassy very closely with the China-Britain Business Council on a number of projects, one of them being e-commerce, so IP protection on e-commerce and social networks in China. It's something which is incredibly important for British businesses, and also indeed at a policy level. So there will be a new e-commerce law coming in force in China probably sometime next year. So a number of the initiatives that Mick is talking about are supported by the British government and by the embassy, and it's something which we would certainly encourage British companies to get involved in, because e-commerce in China is again an exciting opportunity, but there are some pitfalls which need to be navigated. So thank you very much for listening. I'm going to hand over to Mick now, but I look forward to hearing some questions, comments, or challenge from you through the web tool after Mick's speak. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Tom. If you do have any questions, please do type them in, and we can pick them up at the end of the session. Other than that, over to you, Mick.
Hi everyone. Hi. Good to be able to speak to you today, and thanks Tom for introducing the topic. So I'm going to be talking to you today about intellectual property online in China. So that's on the internet, in e-commerce, in social media, and some of the tools that are available for enforcing your rights once you've got them registered. For example, the trademarks that Tom was just talking about, and then some practical tips for doing so. But before I do that, I just want to do a quick plug for the CBBC China Business Handbook, which you can see on your screens there. This is a kind of business guide which David and I, together with a number of colleagues and CBBC members who have expertise in various areas, put together for any British business, and it's available to download on the web link, which you can see there for free. And there are articles, about 25 articles which you may find useful in several different areas about China business, including kind of the politics, the business environment there in the first chapter, issues to do with imports and exports that you might need to know, including logistics, things like that. In chapter 3, things about setting up your businesses in China, starting your company, HR processes, all of that. And then finally about protecting your business interests. And that includes some of the risks that Tom spoke about just now, including intellectual property. So enough about that, but if you want to know more information from CBBC, that's somewhere you can look for some free advice. Next slide, please. Right, so before I get into the intellectual property part, I just want to have a quick note about e-commerce in China generally. So China is a place of big numbers, and e-commerce is no different. So China is the biggest e-commerce market in the world when measured by the value of the sales which are conducted on any of those platforms which are hosted in China. Just to throw a few figures at you, at the beginning of last year, so these figures are now a little bit old, 731 million internet users in China. So more than 700 million Chinese people were using the internet. That's about half of the population in China. And then amongst them, 460 million were shopping online. So you've got 460 million shoppers online in China, and that's really why we're talking about e-commerce here today. That market itself is expected to grow between 20 and 25% per year from now through to 2025, at the same time where the kind of physical stores, physical retail is stagnating, or at least the growth is slowing down. So it's very, very important, and people love to shop online in China. So that's why we're talking about it. Now, just to lay out what some of the major players are then in that space. First and foremost, people always talk about it, and we can't not mention it, is the Alibaba Group. They have a number of e-commerce platforms which you can see laid out there. Alibaba Group platforms are their sort of revenue, what you call gross merchandise value, GMV. It's more per year than eBay and Amazon combined globally. So there's a lot of business going on Alibaba's platforms. Now they've got different ones. They've got Taobao, which is a little bit like eBay. It's for small businesses and people to sell goods to one another. More about that later. They've got something called Tmall, which is the little cat thing you can see there, which is businesses selling products to customers. You've got Alibaba.com, which is businesses selling products to business. It's very popular in supply chain, parts that are used in machinery, everything really. AliExpress, which is a cross-border platform for selling goods between China and outside of China. It's very popular in some parts of the world and growing in the UK, but mostly being used in Russia and Japan, places like that. And then you've got 1688.com. That's again business to business, but unlike Alibaba.com, it's for China domestically. So these are all platforms which are kind of very much part of the e-commerce landscape here. Then going down, there's JD.com. So JD.com, a little bit different, a little bit more like Amazon used to be. They buy a lot of their products themselves and then sell the products themselves. It's since opened out to third-party shops to be able to go on there and make stores, just as Amazon has. But so JD is still the biggest, what you call direct sales shopping platform in China. So it's businesses selling to consumers. And then there's WeChat. WeChat, it's actually a social media app. It's a messaging tool, just like WhatsApp is, and it's a social media app, just like Facebook is. But it's also more than that. It has kind of Twitter-esque functions where you can post things on what you call your moments, and your friends can see them. And then companies and businesses can also register accounts, and they can sell things there, or they can promote goods to be there. But what I've got on the right there is a screen grab from someone's WeChat account, someone that's actually using it to advertise and sell shoes. This just so happens to be one that I was tracking because I noticed they were selling fake Nike shoes. And I thought that was interesting. I wanted to look at what their behavior was. So look, why are we talking about e-commerce in this IP presentation? I mean, so firstly, because it's a very big market. Wherever you have very big markets, inevitably a certain proportion of that, people are going to be selling fakes or other illicit goods. But also, just because it's the internet, it affords criminals a kind of a layer of protection. People can hide behind their computers, anonymize themselves, and it makes them harder to be caught. So in a nutshell, we're talking about it because there's lots of fakes being sold on the internet in China, and it really undermines some of the business outcomes of UK companies such as yourselves. So next slide, please, David. All right, so what can you do about it? So the first half of the equation is registering your intellectual property. The second half of it is enforcing your intellectual property. Now, what does that mean on e-commerce platforms? Well, the most basic one is something that you call notice and takedowns. What this is a system whereby a rights owner, so someone that owns an intellectual property right or a brand, can inform the platform, the e-commerce platform, that something is being sold that shouldn't be allowed to be sold. The idea legally then is that the platform knows about it before you've informed them. The idea is that they probably didn't know about it. Once they know about it, they have a certain obligation to remove that product. What I've got here is something which you may be familiar with back in the UK from YouTube. You've got a kind of unhappy face there. This is a situation where someone's uploaded a video which infringed on Microsoft content in this case, and Microsoft have sent a notice and takedown request to YouTube, and YouTube have then taken it down, and then people can't see that video anymore on YouTube. And it works the same way on e-commerce platforms. Now, the bigger the platforms are, the more sophisticated the notice and takedown systems are. We're going to go in a bit more detail about that later. For the smaller platforms, it might be just that they have an email address, and that's how you inform them. You say, hey, look, this one particular shop, I'm sending you the link to this shop. They're selling products they shouldn't be, and then that website or app then has an obligation to take them down. They work with varying success, but it's just important to know that notice and takedowns are a tool that everyone has. Small companies can use them, big companies can use them. They're at your disposal for enforcement. Then there's two more, probably more for the larger companies. Proactive measures. What I'm talking about here is the opportunity for brand owners, IP rights owners yourselves, to get in touch with the platforms. Let's say it's Alibaba or Jingdong, JD, one of these companies I was just talking about, and work with them in order to help them to protect your IP without you doing it. It sounds wonderful, but it's actually quite resource intensive and time intensive. The way that it would typically work would be you would provide Alibaba with some keywords. For example, you've noticed that someone's selling your tea mugs under fake ABC tea mug or ABC tea mug cheap, very cheap, or something like that, and you inform them about it, and then Alibaba starts to filter out those listings from being able to go up in the first place. Or it might be, say, that this one particular product, it could never be sold at below £10 and still be a real product, and they can start to filter them out. Why is it effort intensive? Because as soon as you do that, the criminals, if they've got any sense, will start to sell the good at a higher price, or start to list the advertisement in a different way, which can't be filtered out. So you have to continually work with the platform. So it's only really available for people who've got a lot of time and kind of people that can specialize on this. There's then offline enforcement. What I'm talking about here is for the kind of the big fish. You can use information which is online on these websites, try and work out where people are sending the goods from, and then send kind of investigators or lawyers to those locations and try and work out who's behind those businesses, and then work with law enforcement, work with the administrative bodies, work with the police, work with the courts to try and make sure that your IP rights are enforced on those individuals in the offline world, rather than just taking down the stuff that the visibility of the goods that's online. Again, quite expensive. You need to have people on the ground in China, not available for everyone, but for the larger companies, that is an effective tool. Next slide, please, David. So just now about these notice and takedown kind of systems in a bit more detail for those platforms that I mentioned earlier. Alibaba probably has the most sophisticated system for doing this. They have something called the IP Protection Platform, or IPP. I've got the link there, and when we circulate the slides later, that's something that you guys can use if you want. It's a very sophisticated system. You can send hundreds of links to Alibaba in one go. If they agree that there has been an IP infringement, they can take down hundreds and hundreds of links all at the same time, and it works very well. It's also very quick. Typically, I think in 95% of cases, the requests are processed within 24 hours, which is by international standards very good, actually. And then secondly, there's something called an online form, which doesn't require you to sign up and kind of upload your personal information and your IP information to their website. A bit more about that later. JD.com, I've also included the links that you can use. Unlike the Alibaba one, this IPR.JD.com is only available in Chinese at the moment. But for some reason, when you get to a step further down the line, there is also an interface that you can use in English. So they're slowly getting there. Not quite as good as the Alibaba one, but you can send them requests to take goods down. And then there's WeChat, so that social media app. A little bit more complicated, to be honest. They've got accounts, as I said, that companies can set up, called public accounts. I've got the link there for sending complaints on that. Apparently that works rather well, but it's just a little bit hard to prove that you own the intellectual property rights. And then there's private accounts, so that's individuals that are uploading advertisements for fake goods or selling fake goods using the app. That is rather more complicated and hard to use. And if anyone wants to talk about that in a bit more detail, I'd be happy to do so. But it's tricky to use and also very, very resource intensive. So I wouldn't jump into that without finding out more information about it. Next slide, please. Okay, so then the Alibaba IPP, or IP Protection Platform, just a bit more detail about that now. I've got a kind of screen grab on the right hand side. You see it's there, it's available in English. It's quite a user friendly and modern sophisticated interface. It works like this. You sign up for an account, you put your name in, your email address, all of that. You have to be able to show who you are. What I mean by that is you have to be able to show that you are the people that own the IP rights, you are the people that own the trademark. Now, if you're looking to enforce your rights on a Chinese domestic platform where goods are only bought and sold within China, that has to be a China IP right, so the registration has to be within China. If it's on an international platform, you could also demonstrate that you're the owner of an international right. The next step is to actually be able to tell Alibaba what rights have been infringed. So it could be trademarks, it could also be your copyrights, it could be your designs, it could be patents. There are other options that Alibaba will accept, but it just gets increasingly complicated. So it's hard. So you have to provide more evidence, such as personal image rights, such as breaking the Chinese anti-unfair competition law, things like that. Geographical indicators. The list can go on. There's quite a lot of things you can enforce on this platform, but the most common one is enforcing your trademarks, and that's something you can certainly do. And you have to upload your trademark certificate to that IPP. It then stays on there, and then subsequently, when you send more takedown requests in the future, you don't have to upload it every time. So Alibaba receives your request. Then they spend about 24 hours to review it, just to check you've sent information. The products that are being advertised do indeed infringe upon your IP. Once they've determined that within 24 hours, they take it down, and then they give the seller an opportunity of 3 days to come back to them with kind of an appeal if they want to. It might be actually that the goods they were selling didn't infringe your IP, and that they might have a case. They have to give them an opportunity to appeal, and that's open for 3 days. That's a big improvement. In the past, Alibaba wouldn't take down the goods when they received the request. They would first give the sellers an opportunity to appeal, and the sellers would provide loads and loads of information, and it would get very, very convoluted and difficult for Alibaba to tell, and that would be how they'd stop the request being processed. So that system's got a lot better. Now, there will be companies in the group which consistently, persistently, year in, year out, take down these listings, and they just keep coming back and keep coming back. And if you're lucky enough to have a product which is very much in demand in China, then that is going to be the case. So Alibaba has things called, for example, called the Good Faith Program. There are some criteria. I won't go into it right now, but for certain companies, typically larger companies, but it's also available to small companies, you can get, if you're sending complaints regularly and you get rather good at it, you're allowed to be given a good faith account. In that case, whenever you send the takedown request to Alibaba, it's taken down immediately, and then the seller's given the normal appeal opportunity. So it works rather more quickly, and you're able to get through processing of higher volumes and make sure that the shops aren't able to keep relisting the products that they're selling that infringe on your IP. When you also get good at it, there's something called the 3 strikes rule. That's if someone infringes on your IP, the first time they're allowed to do it, it's considered a kind of, they might have made a mistake. The second time they get a kind of slap on the wrist, and the third time they have to close down the store. Now that's actually very bad, because these stores have kind of credit ratings within the Alibaba system. It takes them a lot of time and actually a lot of investment and money to get a store to actually appear very high up on your search results, kind of an SEO rating. They've got that internally. So the 3 strikes rule is something which is also very effective. Now, for those of you thinking that all of this sounds like rather a lot of work for a small company, for a big company, and rather expensive, there's actually something you can do which makes it more efficient, which is use what you'd call an online monitoring agency. There's a lot of them out there, and they are professionals at doing exactly what I've just described, and doing it very, very efficiently. Some of them, there's a range. Some of them are small and they're cheap. Some of them are very large and very expensive. There's a range there. And you give them a contract, and you give them the right to enforce your IP, and then they get very efficient at doing it. Some of them have proprietary software, and they can do a very good job for you. And it's something that you should consider. Next slide, please. And then another option for Alibaba, this is my last slide on this, is something called the non-registration submission channel, or online form for short. This is something which is new, and Alibaba are testing it. They're actually working together with CBBC and the British Embassy to test it. It's basically just an online form, and you can see on the right the 2 pages of it. I think it's very good for SMEs. So you don't have to register an IPP account. You don't have to be an IP expert. They hold your hand through the process when you're complaining about things that you're seeing online. All you do is you fill in the form, you tell them what it is that you think is infringing on your IP. They write back to you. They ask you a few questions. They ask you to email them your IP rights every time, and then they kind of have a process, and they might come back to you again and say, okay, this would be okay if you also provide us with this, and then the goods can get taken down. So it's really there to kind of hold your hand through the process. I think it's very good for companies that only submit complaints to Alibaba very occasionally, or probably haven't become very good yet at sending IP takedown requests using the IPP platform that I've mentioned. It takes, the benefits are that it's cheap to use. You get this help. CBBC and Alibaba are there to also provide you some advice. But look, it's only to be used if you send a request occasionally, and it is quite slow in the processing, getting the goods actually offline. So look, if you want to go through with this, I think the step you should take is to actually look at some of the platforms and see if your goods are being infringed. If you're a company that works in the kind of B2B space, I'd advise having a look at this link for Alibaba.com. If you're worried about goods coming in from outside China into your home market in the UK, look at AliExpress.com. And if you're concerned about your sales in China being affected by these domestic markets, then I would suggest you look at this Taobao.com, which is B2C, and it's also C2C, as in small businesses and consumers sell to one another. So have a look there. If you find the products that you make being sold there and your IP being infringed, and then you've got a problem, have a think about how it affects your business. You could choose to use this online form or the Alibaba IPP system. Have a go. If you've got any questions about it, let me know. And when you use this online form and you think, okay, this could be better if X, Y, and Z, let me know, and I'll take that to Alibaba. And I think over time they'll improve this form, improve how the IPP works, and hopefully be able to improve how well you're able to enforce your intellectual property on their e-commerce platforms. Onto the last slide, please, David. So that's it from me, really. I just wanted to let you know, just by a little bit of background, CBBC work very closely with the British Embassy in cooperating with companies like Alibaba, like Tencent that own that WeChat app, like JD.com. We have formal agreements with all these 3 platforms in order to help them to enforce IP on their platforms better. And I think all of these platforms have made great progress in the last kind of 3 years that we've been working with them. If anyone wants to know more about IP on those platforms, just come to us, we can let you know. And then just kind of FYI as well, there are some other kind of smaller but up and coming platforms. The logos are listed on the bottom right hand corner. We work with these platforms as well, not in as much detail, but what we try to do is use some of the lessons that we've learned working with these major platforms over the last 3 years and let them know, what does a good notice and takedown system look like? How can you improve your one? How can you help brand owners to do offline enforcement or proactive measures, some of those things I was talking about earlier. And we also help them to work on special projects around, for example, doing test purchases, so they can help us to monitor their own platforms and see what's being sold there better. So we're doing all of that. If anyone wants to get involved or wants more information, just send us an email and let me know. Right, that's it from me. Last slide. That's it from me. If you've got any more questions about the online space, please do let me know. Back to you, David.
Super. Thanks very much, Mick. Thanks to both Mick and Tom for that sort of whistle-stop tour of all things IP and really the crucial things to look at in 2018 and things that will be more prevalent. The key message from CBBC, as it is always, and you heard it from both Tom and Mick today, is register your trademarks. Get in front of this problem rather than leave it too late, because otherwise the repercussions can be quite challenging for companies. All right, a couple of questions that we're going to delve into. A few on trademarks, which is, I'll throw it out to either you, Tom or Mick. The first one here is from James, and he's asking, do you need to have a legal entity in China to register your trademark?
So thanks for the question. The answer is no, you do not need to have a legal entity in China to register a trademark in China. However, you do need to have a trademark attorney in China who can represent you at the Chinese Trademark Office. So the Trademark Office will want to communicate with a legal representative that's in China for ease of delivery of materials and for language, etc. So the way that you can access a Chinese trademark attorney is either to instruct them directly. So you could find a trademark attorney in China, or perhaps find a few and speak to a few of them and see which one you feel is best for you in terms of price or service quality, etc., and instruct them directly. Or an alternative is to use your usual UK trademark attorney, because most UK trademark attorneys now have relationships with trademark attorneys in China, so they've done all that due diligence for you, and then they can handle the application. They can instruct on your behalf the Chinese trademark attorney, who will then work at the Chinese Trademark Office. Now that does make the chain a little bit longer, can add a little bit of expense, of course, and sometimes can make the communication chain slightly slower, but actually it can end up being much more convenient for you in terms of communication, and means that you don't have to do that due diligence. If you would like to find a trademark attorney in the UK, if you don't have one, or your current trademark attorney is not able to help, then you can go onto the website of the Chartered Institute of Trademark Attorneys, that's CITMA in the UK, and there's a search function on the website. Or if you'd like to try and find a Chinese trademark attorney firm directly, then you can get in touch with Mick Mick Ryan at the CBBC. The CBBC have a list of IP service providers that are active in China that have been used by British and international companies in the past, and that can be shared with you if that's the route that you want to go down. So you do not need to have an entity in China yourself, but you do need to have access to a Chinese trademark attorney to interact with the Chinese Trademark Office.
All right, thank you very much for that comprehensive answer. A question here from Sean. I think this is again for you, Tom. How do you get a hold of the full copy of TIR, the regulation that you were talking about during your presentation?
So the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO, have a English translation of TIR on their website. So it's fairly easy to find through an internet web search. If you put China and then technology import-export regulations, that is usually one of the first links that comes up. There is also a version on the Ministry of Commerce website, the Chinese Ministry of Commerce. If you want to go through to that, they're the same, of course. So they're the two ways to find it. They were published in 2001, and I think there hasn't been a revision, so you can be confident that whichever version you pull off either the WIPO or Ministry of Commerce websites is the current one.
Super. Okay, well, I think that pretty much draws our session to a close for today. I'd like to say thanks very much again to Tom and to Mick for their time and for their expertise. This is a really, really important issue for UK businesses succeeding in China. As you can see, there are ways to be successful and there are ways to protect your IP, but it is certainly not something to be complacent about in any way, manner, shape or form. That pretty much wraps it up. As I said, this session will be recorded and will be put onto our website and YouTube and Vimeo and all of that sort of stuff to be viewed. So if you have a colleague or a friend who you feel should have watched this, then please do direct them to it. In the next 24 hours, we'll send you a follow-up email, which will give you all that sort of content and all that information. So that's pretty much it for today. If you have any questions, please get back to me. I'm David. You will have received my email address on all of the registration materials that you got for this. So that's it for today. Wishing everybody great China business. Bye now.